Well, howdy, y'all. Welcome to another edition of M vs. NPR. This one's going to be on global ocean warming. Global ocean warming. All right, now, hang in there with me. Let's go.
The UN has released a new climate science report on oceans. Here are the headlines. Ice is melting everywhere and sea level rise is accelerating. The oceans are getting hotter faster. This is killing sea animals and disrupting fisheries. And there's also a relatively new problem, heat waves in the oceans.
That's actually not a new problem, and I'll be smoking. That's actually not a new problem, but I won't get into that.
NPR's Rebecca Hersher has the story.
The report is a synthesis of everything we know about climate change in the oceans, so everyone's on the same page about what's happening. And what's happening, in the most basic terms, is that the oceans are getting a lot hotter. The rate of ocean warming has doubled since 1993, and marine heat waves are getting more frequent and intense.
Now let's just check out this graph here real quick. Right now this is a baseline of global temperature from 71 to 2000. This is the actual ocean surface temperature. Now, this is interesting. This goes back starting roughly, I guess, the American Industrial Revolution. But look, so for those people who talk about interglacial periods, we have been on a general track for cooling for a while. What happens here is that the carbon built up and started warming. Okay? And then we had a war, right? Look at that giant drop right there. Millions of people died right there. And also they were too busy killing each other and fighting to survive to actually do anything as far as economy growing and population growing and industrial growth and stuff. Then, the communists killed a bunch of people right about here. I mean, you can almost line it up. Now, correlation doesn't equal causation, but there. Okay. So then we had a period of peace, right? And then we've just been warming all the way. Now it's important to note that even on this graph right here, the coolest variant has been about negative 1.25 degrees. And we're not even at 1 right now. So still we're within the normalcy range of even just this graph. But the argument is that we're in an interglacial period, but interglacial periods only last about 10,000, 12,000 years. And human civilization, as far as we know it, the dog was domesticated about 12,000 years ago. Farming, 7,000 years ago, agriculture, etc. And so that was our warming period. And we should be in an ice age right now, but we're not because of all this. So all that talk about ice ages in the 70s, that was because of ice cores. But the ice cores didn't take into account human greenhouse emissions, global warming, human-caused global warming, because there were no human greenhouse emissions before. All right, but let's continue on with this article.
Heard of marine heat waves? That's because they're new. Andrew Pershing is the chief scientific officer at the Gulf of Maine Research Institute.
It's sort of remarkable that prior to 2012, 2013, nobody kind of thought about heat waves in the ocean. And then in 2012, we had a huge event here in the Northwest Atlantic, and the Gulf of Maine was right at the center of it.
Just like a heat wave on land, the water near Maine got abnormally hot that year. Scientists had never seen anything like it, and it was happening in other places too.
It was a real surprise. And then subsequently, these kind of heat wave events have popped up all over the ocean. So we've actually had 3 major heat waves in the Gulf of Maine, 2012, 2016, and 2018, and repeat heat waves in the North Pacific. Australia's had some repeat heat waves. So it's really becoming a part of the conversation in oceanography.
And of course, it would naturally follow from the second law of thermodynamics. Right? You release heat into the system. Fossil fuels is essentially energy from the sun, processed through living organisms, and then put into the ground, sequestered out of the climate system. And when you release that heat, what you're doing is you're increasing entropy in the system. All systems tend to decrease in entropy, cool over time. Entropy is heat. Heat is energy. Uh, gas is sold in British thermal units, BTUs, literal units of heat, units of energy. So when you burn energy, what you're literally doing is increasing the heat in the system. Just go see an AC unit. To cool the inside of a house, you have to increase the entropy, the heat outside the house. So there's cool air coming out the inside part of the AC unit and hot air going out the backside, the outside part. And so when you increase entropy in the system, what you'll see is hotter hots and colder colds. More rapid cycling, and this is anecdotal for sure, but a 4-year period, then a 2-year period, inter-heat wave, heat globule period. And you'll see more hurricanes, colder colds, which will be shorter, no doubt, and hotter hots. Just when you increase energy in a system, you'll see more variation in it, hotter hots and colder colds, and more rapid cycling. Less stability, because you're increasing the chaos in the system, the heat, the energy.
Because they're so new, scientists still aren't able to predict ocean heat waves or say much about how long they'll last once they start. In fact, right now, there's a marine heat wave off the west coast of the U.S., where there's an area of abnormally hot water known as the blob.
How hot is it? So right now, it is up to 4 degrees Celsius above what we would normally expect.
Hilary Scannell studies marine heat waves at the University of Washington. 4 degrees Celsius is about 7 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than usual, a big enough difference where you'd notice it if you touched the water.
This patch of warm water is very unusual because it is so extreme and intense.
Which is bad news for the animals that live in that water. Noah Oppenheim is the executive director of the Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations. He's also a former marine researcher.
The impacts to the ocean sort of cascade up through the food web, starting with plankton and into the krill, which form the prey base for animals as small as sardines, all the way up to salmon and then whales.
That cascade comes up in the new report. As oceans get hotter and marine heat waves get more intense, it knocks everything in the ocean out of equilibrium. That's already happened in the Pacific Northwest in recent years. Blobs of hot water there caused blooms of toxic algae, which meant the region's Dungeness crab fishery was closed for months.
So now we go back to the whole idea of a just transition. Now, this is hitting the working man. This is hitting the fisherman. This also goes back to a video I made years ago where I was telling Stardust, like, look, whenever they start making shows about how awesome and cool their job is, it usually means they already know that their job's crap, that their job's doomed. Gold mining and fishermen, all those really hot shows like Gold Digging or whatever, and those TLC shows, Discovery Channel shows about crab fishermen. Yeah, they knew years ago that they were screwed, and this is just, now it's just finally hitting the press.
Salmon was also decimated. The federal government declared fishery disasters in 2016 and 2017. It's one of the many economic challenges that come with warmer oceans, in addition to the costs of dealing with sea level rise. And hotter oceans also affect the weather far from the coasts, contributing to droughts and driving bigger, wetter storms. Cutting greenhouse gas emissions dramatically will help with all of these effects, but slowly.
Even if we cut carbon emissions right now, we're still looking at 20 or 30 years of change. And so that means no matter what we do, we have to figure out how are we going to adapt to these changes.
Which will mean...
And that's probably the most important part. We have to accept that we're going to have to adapt or die. That the climate has always changed, but it is now warming. And if anyone wants to know why governments that knew this 20 years ago, 30 years ago, didn't do anything about it then, it's because they knew that we needed to warm the earth a little, that we were going into an ice age, and that polluting the air, causing some greenhouse warming, would actually be a good thing. It has opened up Canada to oil shaling. It will open up Russia to shaling, fracking, harvesting their taiga forest for lumber and stuff. And it will open up the North Pole, as Norway and Finland and Sweden and Greenland and such, and Russia and America and Canada are realizing. It will open up the North Pole to more mineral extraction. So actually, A little bit of greenhouse warming, global warming will be good. The issue will be is if we overshoot it too much. That'll be the real issue.
Remaking the global economy, rebuilding infrastructure, and rethinking how we manage coastal communities. Rebecca Hersher, NPR News.
And no, we won't have to remake the global economy. If the example of what happened to the coal miners in America being priced out of their jobs because of energy independence by America and cheap oil and cheap gas proves anything, is that if we just continue down a reasonable path, these problems will solve themselves. The market will work. Of course, we can't let it just run roughshod over the environment, but it will work. It's better if we guide it instead of try to force it. All right. Well, you guys have a nice day. And always remember to go your own way. Yours truly, Ed.